This is the fourth in our series of seminars on technical production and accounting. In the previous meeting, which I had the privilege of conducting, we talked about the general facets involved in the production side of putting on a program. We started out by the definition of above and below the line. I'll show you here a slide which we used at that time. A quick resume of this slide shows you that above the line is made up of the people who think up and plan the illusion, and the below the line are the people who take the illusion and make it real. The elements of production itself are shown on this slide. These are the departments involved directly in the creation of the production elements themselves. When these people have made their contribution and we are ready to go to the first stages of actual production, which is the estimating stage. As soon as the estimating stage takes place, we are ready to plan the actual work on the production. We felt that at these previous meetings, you had had enough of theory, and it was time that you saw in person what went on in the putting on of a production. Now tonight we have planned a sort of thumbnail production. We boiled the whole thing down to just one set. But in this one set, there are all the elements which take place in the production of a complete show. This is just in capsule form. Starting out, the first thing that you encounter, of course, is the studio. Now, we talked a little bit about studios and the fact that there are two types of studios. The audience-type studio in which you are now seated, and the non-audience-type studio used primarily for dramatic shows. The theater-type studio, or audience studio if you wish, in which you are now seated, has a very particular purpose. It is used primarily for variety musical shows in which the performers on the stage impersonate themselves. Through a great deal of experience, we have found that the performer who is impersonating himself has a much easier job and does a much better job if he has somebody to talk to, in other words, an audience. The actor standing up on the stage in a great deal of light, who doesn't have an audience, is sort of talking to himself, and this is rather unsatisfactory, and it's rather hard to really tell how you're getting on. With an audience, they laugh, hopefully, at the jokes. They applaud when something spectacular is done or something difficult, and this kind of eggs the actor on to do a better job. So the audience makes a great contribution to any kind of a musical variety show. An audience for a dramatic show in television, where there is so much activity, where you do not necessarily do the show entirely in sequence, can be a distracting element. Therefore, we discourage an audience in conjunction with an ordinary dramatic show. The audience studio presents one rather serious problem in the organization of your show, which is that because the audience is in a fixed position and cannot move about, all of the action in the stage or in the show must take place in just one place, right here on the stage. Therefore, it's necessary to change our scenery very rapidly so as not to interfere with the progress of the program. In order to do this, we use a regular garden variety theatrical stage. I'm going to ask our stage manager, Mr. O'Brien, to kindly open the traveler curtain here and let you have a look at the stage. Here is a stage which is basically completely bare. There are a few elements of the production leaning against the wall, awaiting its organization. Now, a stage is basically an empty space, as you see. At either side, there are wings or off-stage spaces where scenery may be stored and gotten out of the way of the acting area. A great aid in getting rid of the complex scenery for the average variety show is to raise it up above the audience's viewpoint into what is called the flies. That is, the stage has a very high ceiling. Up above the portion of the stage which you can see is the rigging loft, or the fly loft, if you wish. In this house, it is about 60 feet high. This permits the raising up of pretty large pieces of scenery well out of the way. This job is accomplished by a complex set of rigging and counterweights. Over on stage left, which is your right, you see the pin rail. These are the counterweight sets and the ropes which control the rigging. When these are operated, they lower the drop, which just came down in back of me, and conversely take it away with the greatest of ease. Above the stage also is a great deal of the lighting equipment, which models the set, models the actors, and makes it possible for us to get rather good pictures. The curved cloth at the back of the stage is the cyclorama, which I mentioned. Now, another problem directly connected with the use of a theater for television is the fact that because of the audience occupying practically all of the space in front of the stage, there's no place to put the lighting effectively. To overcome this, we use the front of the balcony rail as a mounting place for equipment. You are now seeing some of the equipment which is mounted on the balcony rail. The equipment usually consists of a large collection of strip lights because they do not cause shadows from the technical equipment immediately in front of the actors. Another feature is the flooring. The floor of a stage is especially built with a great deal of resiliency and spring for dancers. Dancers working on a hard floor, taking a leap into the air, come down with a most discouraging clunk and tend to hurt their feet rather seriously. They cannot work well on a hard concrete floor, so special construction is necessary. Over on your right, my left over here, is the area occupied by the orchestra for the show. Other features of a theater are a very large air conditioning plant of several hundred tons, which involves a great deal of machinery which is located in the basement and the sub-basement. We also have the marquee out in front on the street to let the incoming audience know what's playing here, and we hope attract a few extra guests. This presents more of a problem than it seems because a great deal of time is devoted to determining whose name is going to be over who else's name and changing these about very often at the last minute. This theater in which you are seated, known to all of us as Studio 50, has a rather interesting history. It was built in the late 20s by Arthur Hammerstein, the father of Oscar Hammerstein, the famous lyricist. This was one of a number of theaters that he built around New York. It was built as a legitimate theater for the presentation of plays and musicals, but unfortunately in a rather bad location. It was just above the theatrical district, and it was never a success. It had 2 shows of minor success and then was empty for a number of years. It was taken by the Columbia Broadcasting System as a radio house in the early 30s, following a short period in which it was a rather successful nightclub. It was a radio house up until the early 50s when it was converted to television, its present use. Aside from being a rather ornate, elaborate, and quite large legitimate theater, its only other item of distinction is that it is the only legitimate theater built in New York City which was built with an organ. It's up on each side here. Now, this session that we have tonight is a joint session between technical operations and production operations. We have combined them so that you can see how they work together and to point out the very important fact that their operations are very closely interwoven and are very much interdependent. We do not function very well separately. Now, as we mentioned in our earlier discussions, all production work starts with the designer. On the screen, we're going to show you a design with the designer putting the finishing touches on what is obviously an interior. The work of the designer, as we pointed out, is very, very important. It is a very hard job. The inspiration for a scene may come very quickly. It may be hours and hours and hours of very hard painstaking work before you achieve something that is possible, something that is within the budget. Very often, those of you who are directly engaged in arranging the details of a show, particularly in arranging its estimates, forget that the design function is a separate function and not part of the construction period, that it too takes time and must be allowed for. Many people think that just because they have given the designer the sketch, they have nothing more to worry about and it should turn up in the theater in a few minutes. Actually, he must have time, the shops must have time, delivery must have time, the studio organization must have time, and this must be allowed for. This is all part of the highly important function of planning. So many shows do not plan. Their costs go up and up and up because they do not plan. They do not think out what they are going to need, what time it is going to take to get this, so that it can be built without completely unreasonable expense. I see that our designer has finished the sketch, and we can now send it off to the next step, which is estimating. As soon as we get to the estimating function, we come to the production supervisor. Now, the production supervisor is one of the more important members of our entire organization. He is our liaison with the program department, with our customers. He is the controller of our money. It is up to him to see that the show is properly estimated, that the money is obtained from our client, that the various departments performing functions know how much money they have to spend, that they know exactly where they are going, and that they are not allowed to exceed this amount. In effect, the production supervisor becomes the prime contractor for our services, and all of the rest of us are basically subcontractors to this contractor. Now, over on the screen, we see a real, live, genuine production supervisor preparing the budget. He is doing pretty well here for a hypothetical show. These figures, incidentally, are not the figures of any particular show, nor do they actually represent any particular costs. This is an ordinary show with one-day operation in the studio, estimated to take about 12 hours, with a stage and technical crew, 2 stage managers, scenery of an early 1900 room, costumes of a 1900 period. This estimate seems to be coming along rather well. As soon as the estimate is ready, he turns up the authorization to the departments, which is shown on this next slide. On this next slide, we will show you what takes place. It's over on the small screen. This is what takes place as soon as the authorization is received. All of the departments are notified, all of the departments go to work and proceed to make their contributions. The set, which you have just seen in the drawing, now goes to construction, and we have some pictures showing you our carpenter shop in full swing, our paint deck in full swing, and we presume that the set is finished and carried down to the loading docks to be placed upon the trucks and moved from that area into the studios, such as the one in which you are now seated. Now, I'm going to ask our special effects department to please put on again the set, the sketch of the set, so that you may be reminded of what it is all this work is going on to do. Now, we're going to ask Mr. O'Brien, our stage manager, to open the traveler curtain again, and let's see how this set actually came out. Now, the first item that's being set up stage here is a rear projection screen. This interior has a window, and some action must take place back of this window. At an earlier session, I called your attention to the fact that very rarely nowadays does scenery get made out of canvas or wood. You'll notice this one is made out of sheet metal. It's not unusual to have things of this nature made out of almost anything. Now, the sketch, if you look at it over there, and I think you can see it, shows just a bare room with no identification really of what it is. If If you'll notice the work that is being done on the stage here, you will note that the set has been made livable and believable by the addition of the set dressings. These set dressings, as you see, have converted the whole thing into a 1900 barber shop. So it's too bad I got that haircut yesterday. Well, anyway. Now, over on your right, if you can see, we have a dressing room. Kindly volunteering to show how this works is Miss Sue Forrest, who is being made up for her appearance on television. Makeup is a highly important contribution, as we pointed out. Miss Forrest happens to be a very pretty girl. Very often, you will find stars who are not pretty girls, who must be converted to pretty girls, or stars who have facial conditions which do not photograph well. Stars who have many other problems which must be corrected, and makeup can do this. Makeup also can change almost anyone into any character that you would like to have. Going on over here on my right, we have one of our scenic artists from the shop who is illustrating a problem which is quite general in television and brought to your attention. The fact that wherever two flats go together, like these two flats, you have a crack. As a time-saving device, our scenic artist has prepared in the shop a piece of painted tape, the same color as the flat. He pastes this over the crack, as you see it here, puts it down, and he will subsequently apply one that's the same color as the bottom panel. When this is viewed on camera, here, as you can see on the monitors, you can't see it. This saves a great deal of time and makes the set look very much more believable. Going back over here to your right, my left, I believe that we have very nearly finished our makeup on Miss Forrest. We're going to ask now that she step into the dressing room here, where Miss Kay Sevier will put the finishing touches on her costume. Now, while this work is going on, I'd like to point out the activity of our lighting director, who comes on stage and takes very careful measurements of all of the lighting. He may find that he has a dark spot, in which case he will bring on some additional equipment, add this to the general setup now in operation, and try to even out the dark spot. A very sterling performance, obviously. Our costume is now going on over here very, very nicely. Our stage manager has found that we have one or two problems with the set, and judging by eye and long experience that these will give trouble, he is busily engaged in correcting these so that nothing untoward will happen. While he is doing that, and just for a final check on the set, I'm going to ask the special effects department if they will be good enough to project the background that's back of this window. In this case, motion picture film, so that we can see how that looks. And I believe that you will agree with me that this brings the entire set to life. Now, I think that our sets, our props, our costumes, and our makeup are just about ready for us to go into rehearsal. After the show has been aired and seems to be over as far as everyone else is concerned, the work of production is still not complete. We still have additional work that has to be done. First of all, we must take off the makeup, which you see is going on over on your right. The costumes are being put away. Mr. O'Brien is about to strike the set. And while this is going on, we'll see the other highly important activity which is done at this time. The production supervisor, Mr. Cambria, is busily engaged in getting together his post-estimate. You will note that several things have happened to the estimate to make it different from the post-estimate. We originally figured that this set was going to be a modern interior. The director, however, decided to change his mind at the last minute and make it a 1900 period. This involved a little bit more work for the shop, a little bit more painting, and cost a little bit more money, so his estimate is a little bit higher than when he started out. You will find also that the rehearsal took a little bit longer than was anticipated, so the cost for studio usage technicians and stagehands has likewise gone up. In other words, the show cost a little bit more money than had been estimated. However, each one of these changes was approved by the producer of the show, so that he is not the least bit upset when he gets what you now see on the screen here, which is the bill which is received by the client. Once this document that you see here is mailed out, the show is really over. Thank you.